Hello fellow audio nerds, I'm Steph, and this is Major Hi-Fi. Fairly often, when I'm hanging out with my audiophile friends, or just chatting with audio nerds about audio nerdy things, the topic of DACs and amps comes up. And rightfully so. I mean, they're very important tools. But so often I hear folks use those words interchangeably. Well, today, I want to take a closer look at them individually because they're actually very different from each other. And I want to try and help answer the question of whether or not you need one. So, yeah, what's the deal with DACs and amps? In today's recording world, the following process happens in order to record a song. Let's take a simple singer, for example. So the singer sings. Their little vocal cords vibrate. This vibrates the air in front of them, and that air, those air molecules sort of bump into each other and eventually bump into a microphone. Inside the microphone, there's a little diaphragm, and the process for how this is converted into electrical energy differs depending on the type of microphone, but basically a small amount of voltage is created, or rather is converted, I guess. This little bit of electricity goes through a wire into a control room where there's a recordist. They will amplify that signal a little bit so they can manipulate it better. And then it'll probably go through some outboard gear, some effects, if you will. And then eventually it will go to an analog to digital converter. And it sort of converts this electrical signal into zeros and ones so that then you can record that information to a computer. And this is all kind of super dumbed down, but the point is that it sort of is this like analog thing that becomes an electrical thing and then becomes finally a digital thing. This digital information is just that. It's information. It's information that was sampled by the converter. And the more samples that happen to be taken, the more resolution you get. You can sort of think of it like an image, and the greater the pixel count, the more individual snapshots of that picture that the computer takes, the greater the resolution is. Now, once that song is mixed and mastered, oftentimes in today's world, as you probably know, that that little bit of, I don't want to use the word bit because that's actual like computer jargon, but that little file that has this song recorded then kind of lives in the digital domain for a long time, and that's usually what we're consuming when we listen to music. It's definitely what we're consuming when we are listening to music on our phones. But in order to hear that file, you have to go through sort of the same process that we just went through. Remember back to the singer, right? Where we went from this analog thing to an electrical thing to a digital thing. We have to do the same thing again. So we have to go from, but just reversed. So we have to go from the digital world. I'm going to go back to convert that to an electrical signal that then will move some air, probably your headphones, and hit your ear in the analog sort of world. So that's where the DAC comes in. It's a digital to analog converter, and it's what you need in order to actually hear the file that you want to listen to. And your phone, all the listening devices, your computer, your phone, your player, has a DAC built right in. The thing is, though, that a lot of times those DACs are not the priority of that device. So more attention by the manufacturers and the designers was paid to your phone's screen, probably, than to the little DAC that converts the audio files. So it ends up being that it's not the highest resolution. It's not taking quite as many samples as it could in order to reproduce the full breadth of information that exists within that file to recreate the song the way it was before. And that's where, you know, an external DAC might come in. And when audiophiles are talking about DACs, that's usually what they're referring to. Something external from their phone that is converting the digital information into something analog, something that you can then hear. On the other hand, an amplifier is something that boosts the electrical signal. So in the case of the microphone scenario from before, right, because this small amount of air moved the diaphragm of the microphone, it was converted to electrical energy, and it was just such a small amount of energy. I mentioned briefly that the engineer would then amplify that signal a little bit so that they could manipulate it more. And in the case of a headphone amplifier, it's the same concept in the sense that, you know, your electrical signal is going to get boosted a bit. And so much of whether or not you need one is dependent on the type of headphones that you're working with. Different headphones require different amounts of power, and there are differently powered amps to sort of account for that. It's often that you see the words DAC/amp used together, and I think that must account for why there's so much confusion about what these things are and why they are used interchangeably sometimes by mistake. But in reality, you know, a lot of DACs also have built-in amps into them. That sort of helps to distinguish the devices that are only DACs from the devices that have a headphone amplifier built right in. If you're asking yourself the question, do I need a DAC? The answer is probably yes, and I'll say that because that means that you recognize that the resolution that you're getting from your phone or computer isn't as great as it could be. And the big caveat to that, though, is that in order to notice a big difference between using your computer's DAC and using an external, more dedicated DAC, you have to be listening to files that have more information than your phone or computer can actually reproduce. So if, for example, you're listening to a super low resolution file, something like an MP3 that's just been like, you know, doesn't have a lot of information there, you aren't going to notice a huge difference if your DAC can sample more than that, because your computer and your phone can already recreate it. But if you're listening to a bigger file, something like a WAV or a FLAC file, or even, you know, I listen to Spotify Premium and use the highest resolution speed, and I can notice a big difference then between just using my phone's DAC and using an external, more dedicated DAC. Do you need an amplifier? That's a question that's a little bit harder to answer in some circumstances because the thing is, every headphone has different amplification needs. In a really general sense, if you want your headphones to be louder, you should use an amplifier. I say that in a sense and then like tiptoe away from it slowly because in reality, you know, if you have a headphone that has a low impedance and a high sensitivity, adding amplification to that can cause some distortion. It can actually hurt your headphones, like break the actual like diaphragm of the headphone. So it's worth noting, and I think in this case I want to say, like, use your best judgment. Like, how loud are you trying to listen to these things, and keeping in mind hearing damage. But if you find that, you know, you're listening with a certain device and it's just not loud enough, even when you turn the volume all the way up, chances are you would definitely benefit from a dedicated headphone amplifier. Luckily, a lot of devices end up having some control over the amount of gain they produce, especially little DAC amp combos. A lot of times they'll have a high and low gain switch that you can sort of toggle, so that if you are listening to a headphone that doesn't need as much amplification, you can kind of dial that back and still have the benefit of a really nice DAC attached. But with that said, this is a complicated topic, and I do appreciate your attention, and I appreciate any sort of additional comments you have about DACs and amps, because yeah, it sort of seems like the topic in general, one could spend you know, hundreds and thousands of dollars and years of time learning about to really get a full grasp on it. So thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time. Alright, bye.